In today's game, Hikaru Nakamura shows us a very powerful strategy to be used against the Najdorf Sicilian. Welcome to Chess Dog. Today's game is from 1999, actually, when Hikaru was younger. He was still a master, but not yet a grandmaster. This was played at the Washington Eastern Open against now international master Oladapo Adu. And Hikaru has white. Adu has black. Let's jump right in. E4, C5, knight F3, D6, D4, CD4, knight D4, and now E6. Now, technically, we're in Scheveningen territory. You'll notice that black has not developed his knight at G8 yet, which is unusual, and Hikaru could have taken advantage of that by playing C4 and creating a Maraxi bind or hedgehog structure. But instead, he goes ahead and plays the more traditional knight to C3. Now A6 is played, and here we have sort of a Najdorf-Scheveningen hybrid. This is actually the pawn structure that Garry Kasparov used to play, although he had already developed his knight at G8, but we'll transpose. F4, gaining space in the center, and knight to C6. Black directly challenges Hikaru's knight on D4. Hikaru defends it with E3, and now knight to F6 is played, targeting the E4 pawn, and we are in more traditional territory, basically a Najdorf, where black has decided to play E6 instead of E5. And here we can see there's a nice space advantage. E4 is going to be black's main target here, and perhaps if black can play the move D5 later, he would certainly like to. So queen to F3 is played. This is a powerful move from Hikaru, and definitely one to remember when you're playing against this structure. It does many things. One thing it does is clear the back rank so that white can castle long. It also supports a G4 pawn push. It also helps keep this D5 square under control because D5 is a natural push for black to liberate their position. So it's a multi-purpose and powerful move. Queen to C7, same thing. It keeps the knight defended, allows him to play B5, places it on the half-open C file. The queen usually goes to C7 in these structures. Hikaru castles long. He's ready to go for it, ready to attack. Bishop to D7 and now G4. He wants to dislodge this knight from F6 so that it no longer controls the center and relieves the pressure on E4. Black plays knight takes D4, takes the central knight, bishop takes D4, and now bishop to C6. We talked about how this E4 pawn is one of black's main targets. Well, now the knight and the bishop both aim at this pawn, and he's in better position to advance D5. Hikaru goes ahead and takes the knight on F6. Now, that means he's giving black the advantage of the two bishops, but he does some damage to the pawn structure here, as we see, even though, again, the two bishops are there. But one thing Hikaru can now do is attack down the D file, maybe put some pressure on D6. But first he plays F5. This is a very common idea in this pawn structure, which often occurs in a classical Sicilian. And basically what white wants to do is put as much pressure on the light squares as possible, particularly E6. He's going to play the bishop here. He might reroute the knight to E2, C4, all aiming at that E6 square. Bishop to E7, bishop C4. B5, bishop to B3, B4 kicks the knight, and now knight to E2. You can go to F4 or D4, aiming at E6. To prevent this powerful idea, black goes ahead and plays E5. That keeps the knight now out of C3, D4, and F4, but it does create a weakness at D5, so you get some squares, but you give up some squares too. It also makes this pawn structure very rigid, which is not good for the bishops. Knight to G3, A5 is actually the best square for this knight, so Hikaru aims at it. A5, pressing on the queen side, king to B1, A4, the bishop has to move, goes to C4, rook to C8, doubling up on the C file, putting some pressure on the bishop at C4. By the way, if you're getting value from this video, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button for future videos. Hikaru plays B3. He decides to leave that bishop there on that square and kind of create a wall against his king. The only thing he does have to be aware of is at some point black might sacrifice the exchange for that bishop, and that could open up his king later. The queen goes to B7, clearing the way for the rook to play an exchange sack, but also attacking the pawn at E4, the most vulnerable point in white's position. Queen to E2 steps out of a pin along that diagonal. And now rook to B8. And I have to just be completely honest with you. I don't understand this move at all. Neither do computers. I put it in a computer. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So, and I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. But Hikaru's move, rook h to e1, makes a lot of sense. He's centralizing, and he wants to really overprotect that e4 pawn so that this knight can move to the strong square at a5, where it puts pressure on the f6 pawn. Rook to g8 attacks the pawn at g4, so you defend it with h3. Queen to d7, and it seems like black is looking for a plan. Hikaru's strategy of taking on f6 and creating this rigid structure has made it hard for black to find a way to get through. Hikaru plays queen to d2. This is a devious move. And not only is he aiming at d6, but more importantly, he wants to play the queen into h6, which would cause all kinds of havoc for black. Black really cannot allow that. So he plays rook to g5 to block the queen out. Now knight to h5. This, even though the knight is on the side of the board, and people say we're not supposed to put knights on the side of the board, in this case, the knight at a5 is very well placed, and it puts a lot of pressure on that f6 pawn, which looks well protected, but we'll see in a second, it's not as well protected as it looks. And here, a good move maybe for black would be a3. On computers like a3, the problem is even after a3, white has a total bind on the position, and I really don't see a way that black is going to be able to get in that b2 square and those sensitive dark squares. But Adu makes a mistake in this position. He plays the move queen to b7, and this allows a very nice tactical shot from Hikaru. Do you see it? That's right. He plays knight takes f6 check. Bishop takes knight, which is forced. Now queen d6, which attacks the bishop at e7, and the bishop has to move. You can't defend the bishop because with the queen, let's say, because then the rook at b8 would hang. So the bishop has to move back, and now queen takes e5. And we see this position Hikaru is dominating. He has 3 pawns for the piece that he just gave up, but more importantly, black's king is stuck in the middle of the board, and all of Hikaru's pieces are completely centralized. Black is in big trouble. He plays f6, which does hit the queen, but the queen moves up to e6, threatening queen to f7 mate. The king could not flee the d-file because of the rook at d1. So that has to be defended. Black plays rook to g7 to hold that point, but now e5, continuing to press. Black plays bishop to d7. If he takes the pawn, then f6 just forks the rook and the bishop, and that's it. So bishop to d7, and here Hikaru makes a very beautiful move. It is the computer's top choice. He has more than one way to win this position, but he chooses the most aesthetic. He plays queen takes f6. He plays a queen sacrifice. Very powerful. Bishop takes, and now pawn takes with check while attacking the rook at g7. The king moves, fg7 check, king g7, and now this move, rook to e7 check, with an attack on the king and the pawn. You see both rooks are aiming at this bishop. So he will win that bishop and have a nice material advantage. King f6, rook e to d7, hitting the queen. The queen moves to e4, and this next move really spells doom for black. Hikaru plays the move g5 check. Now, if he takes the f5 pawn, then just bishop to d3, pins the queen and wins it. So king takes g5 is forced. And now rook to g1 check. And in this position, Oladapo Adu resigned. And this is the reason why. Let's take a look. If he moves to the h-file, say h5 or h4, then it's just mate. Rook takes h7 is mate. If he plays king to f5, bishop to d3, again pins the queen to the king. If he plays king to f4, rook to g4 check, that wins the queen. And if king to f6, rook to f7 check, you see that rook is defended by the bishop at c4. Then the king is forced to e5, and then rook to e7 check, and again wins the queen. A very powerful display against the Najdorf, with a lot of tools that we can use in our own games. Now, even after going over this great game from Hikaru Nakamura, there is still some great chess you're missing out on. To fix that problem, believe it or not, the key game you're going to want to watch is in this video right here, so be sure to check that out for some amazing chess. Goodbye.